Hello, welcome to this episode of The Living Process. My name is Greg Madison, and my guest in this episode is Claude Missiaen. Claude is a clinical psychologist from Belgium, very well known in the focusing community. He serves on the International Leadership Council, and he's also been very active at the University of Leuven in Belgium on the experiential trainings. And that's one of the things we speak about in this episode. Claude first came to focusing through work with Missiaen, also very well known in the focusing world. And we speak a little bit about a couple of his projects. One is the development of working with our existential demons, which is a fascinating thing that he has begun to offer at conferences. And hopefully more of us in the international community will get to sample that work. And another very interesting project is how he uses supervision, which is something that he has mostly developed, it sounds like, through his work in Poland. And I won't go into detail, but it's a very interesting process of how to get different sort of process strands in supervision, including the client's perspective. So we touch on many different aspects of Claude's work and some of the different ways that focusing is similar to, but not quite the same as EFT and other ways of working experientially. Claude also emphasizes the existential aspect of focusing and experiential work. And he offers a 1-year FOT program along with colleagues in Belgium, and also is involved in the Focusing Vlaanderen project. The link to that is at the end credits. And I enjoyed very much speaking with Claude, and I hope you enjoy this episode of The Living Process. Hi, Claude.
Hi, Greg.
Welcome,
Mhm.
and very nice to see you. And I thought maybe we could start the conversation with you just, I mean, I know that many people in the focusing world know you well, but you might tell the story differently. So just curious how you got into focusing, into Gendlin's work, just where it all started for you.
Okay. It started rather early in the 80s of the last century, so long time ago, and it started by coincidence. In fact, I was in my last year of studying psychology, clinical psychology, and we had to choose a topic for a master proof. One of the topics was focusing. It was offered by Missiaen, and we were five students who were eager to do that. Um, the promoter organized a lottery, and I won. Yeah, so I could make my master proof about focusing with Mia, and I found it so fascinating. I never heard about it, and in that time I started reading journaling and all around journaling. So for me, it started very early and it never left me. So afterwards, I started my person-centered therapy. And then there was this kind of transition between Rogers and Jenlin. Jenlin came more into the picture.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then I started training, focusing myself to give trainings as a young psychologist, young psychotherapist, and I really liked it, and I enjoyed this moving processes that happened there when people got in touch with some deeper layers and they was surprised by it. Yeah, that's how I came into this focusing community. First in my own country, Flanders, the northern part of Belgium, and then later international.
Um, Interesting that it started with winning a lottery. That's an
Yes,
unusual way to get into
yes,
focusing. But
yeah,
you must have thought there was something important there for you in order to put yourself forward as a possible student for working with Maya. What was
yeah.
it that made you interested enough that you pursued it?
I don't really remember. It
Okay.
looked like something new,
Uh-huh.
something I did not know about, not something like empathy or unconditional positive regard that
Mhm.
I thought I already knew, which wasn't the case afterwards, but there was something innovative in it. So, and that attracted me. And something very personal also. Like,
Okay.
yeah, this little book of Gendlin was just out, I guess. And yeah, I read it and I said, oh, wow, what is this about? I didn't understand it really well at the beginning,
Mhm.
but it kept on fascinating me.
So you've been in the two worlds really from the beginning, the person-centered and the focusing.
Yeah, indeed, indeed, yes. And that was difficult for me to,
Mhm.
but at some point, there was a kind of splitting or going their own way. I was very much involved in this line of international conferences of the World Association for Person-Centered Approach, and I followed that line. But at a certain point, the focusing conferences, they yeah, they begin to to develop an own track. In our small world in Leuven at the university, we have a person-centered training at 4 years,
Mhm.
and we have an integrated model. We have the classical Rogerian tradition. We have the focusing-oriented tradition. We have the EFT also included, and we have the existential dimension.
Hmm.
And we try to make it. I don't. It's not true that it's already integrated, but we offer it as a whole uh, compact puzzle, which with this all these dimensions are in it.
That sounds fascinating. I immediately try to imagine those different dimensions as separate.
Hmm,
And
hmm.
I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not sure how
Yeah,
focusing could be thought of somehow as separate from the existential or the person-centered or an emotion-focused therapy that doesn't have focusing in it. Can you say more about that, just for someone like me that doesn't quite understand it?
yeah. You see it as separate dimensions,
I
or
don't see it.
you don't see it.
I
Yeah,
don't understand the separation, maybe.
yeah. Well, we try to avoid the separation, and we try to bring to make bridges
Hmm. Mm.
between these traditions, but there are differences. Like EFT is more directive than classical focusing, for instance.
Okay.
It's a bit more methodological than existential tradition. So there are some differences, and but the let's say the core values of the humanistic tradition are in all of that practices.
Hmm.
And I guess all our trainers are really deeply humanistic in values and in practice. So that's
Hmm.
what brings us together. And we have to be careful with the differences, that they don't divide us in us and them. And
Hmm.
but we are in a good, fruitful process about that. We are on good speaking terms about that.
Hmm.
Does
Do
that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does
Yeah.
to some extent. I want to follow it up just by asking, um, partly because I think this is something we haven't done very much of in the focusing world or the FOT world, is do you have um, opportunities to kind of discuss and to sort of tease out? Because it sounds to me as though you have a common spirit of approach,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
but that there are differences in emphasis, perhaps, in the different
Yes, indeed, indeed.
avenues you're describing. Do you have
Mhm.
opportunities to kind of tease that out a little bit more, the different emphases between different schools, or is it more an emphasis of what's similar?
No, we are also looking at our differences because
Mm.
that could be the risk of splitting. That's a too big word, I guess, but yeah, maybe a bit dividing, and we definitely want to avoid that divisions.
Mhm.
So we make opportunities to talk about similarities, but also about differences,
Mhm.
and also concrete about differences in paradigm.
Mhm.
There are some paradigm differences, like in EFT and focusing, for instance. So we try to give that as much attention as we can, and I would like to have it more, but yeah, of course we have all full schedules, and
Yeah.
but I'm very hopeful about the evolution. And what brings us together is that we are all person-centered therapists. We
Okay.
are educated, trained as person-centered therapists. So we have this, let's say, this mainstream as a common stream, and they are like uh, rivers that go a bit aside and come back to the
Mm.
big river, to the main river. That's a bit how this metaphor lives with me in our situation with our trainers and different traditions.
Yeah, I'm just one more question on this, just because it's very interesting to me, because
Okay.
I don't think we have had too much discussion about even some of the small differences between us and other approaches that are quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've been in that situation where you've been able to understand maybe some of the smaller, you say, paradigm differences. So I'm curious if you could say, just so that the rest of us could understand a bit more, what sorts of differences would you see between focusing and EFT, for example?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's say that with I don't want uh, to see it as a black or white situation. It's differences in nuances. It's not just opposites.
Hmm.
But I think I also had an EFT training in Belgium, so I can see a bit the differences and the similarities. I think the risk in EFT is that it could become too methodological if it's not in good hands. While focusing, I'm in this part of the focusing world that see focusing not as a method or a technique, but as an attitude, as a way of being.
Yeah.
So that's certainly a difference. Uh, we are about to discuss this subpersonalities in EFT. The subpersonalities are interacting with each other, and there is no moderator, let's say. In focusing, we have the self in presence,
Hmm.
who is bigger than the conflict of the subpersonalities or partial selves. So that's also a difference that we still have to talk about together. So it's not fundamental, but
Hmm.
there are some issues that are a bit different.
That sounds fascinating. That's a great example. Now I'm beginning to get a sense of uh, kind of how exciting it could be to sort of
Mhm.
tease apart and even, I guess, from a focusing perspective, to temporarily adopt someone else's method just to see
Mhm.
what it does.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
Mhm.
are there aspects of some of these other approaches that you think we could usefully uh, integrate into an FOT way of working? Things you've come across that you think that actually works really well experientially?
Yes. Well, the field where you are in, Greg, and we in Leuven are also developing, so the existential, experiential,
Mhm,
let's say integration, that is very fascinating and very promising for me and for our colleagues, and I think for you too.
mhm,
You know about this existential demons model I developed to work with our deepest fears and anxieties and demons in an experiential, in a focusing way.
mhm.
So that is very promising for me to bring this together, to bring the existential into the experiential, the focusing, but also another tradition is that of voice dialogue. uh, Um, I also had a few sessions in voice dialogue for my own process,
Mhm,
so I don't know it in theoretical terms, but in one of my workshops where I work with the inner critic as a subpersonality and we have a dialogue with him, uh, not like EFT in dialoguing with the experiencing self, so with the person itself, but we put him apart, set him apart, and we have a dialogue with the therapist. So, and the inner critic of X. And that is very, whoa, there opens up some kind of the mission of the therapy, of the inner critic, the vulnerability, the uncertainty of the inner critic.
uh-huh.
And I had in one of my participants who is an expert in voice dialogue. She said, "Hey, this is very nice. It's very similar to voice dialogue." So, without really trying to integrate that, I seem to have done that, and it's perfectly um, integratable with focusing attitude. Mhm.
So in that example, it's you um, externalize the inner critic and then kind of almost have a dialogue with it in some way.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yes,
you get to know more deeply what's in the inner critic, what motivates it, what
indeed.
it's afraid of. That sounds
Yeah,
very
exactly.
powerful. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Because most people they know their inner critic as their destroyer or their attacker,
Yeah.
but they never listen to him, of
Hmm.
course,
Hmm.
because he's so aggressive or destructive. So we make a space for this inner critic itself with his own dynamics,
Hmm.
his own pain, his own longings
Hmm.
as a subpersonality.
Hmm.
And that's how the voice dialogue comes in. And also EFT. EFT is also it's chair work, but in EFT with the inner critic, they organize a dialogue
Hmm.
with the experiencer, and I do it slightly different. I have the dialogue with me as a therapist.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I hope that's
interesting.
clear a bit. Yeah.
So it's like you as the therapist are in relationship with the person's inner critic.
Yes, indeed,
Okay,
indeed. Yeah, yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Can we just go back a bit because I know that you've started to present this work at focusing conferences, and maybe you've been doing it other places even before that.
Hmm.
But the existential demon work, can you describe that a bit more to us? It sounds fascinating.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, yeah, when I learned about existential therapy,
Hmm.
I had the impression that almost all of them say that to have a fuller life, at one point we have to face our challenges, our ultimate givens. We have to face our death. We have to face the loss of our uh, loved ones. We have to face the fact that maybe there is no real meaning in all of this. So, when I did this with my students in the postgraduate training, for instance, the seminar about death, some of them said, "Oh no, I don't want to think about it. And when I'm dead, I don't know anymore, so that's no problem." So that kind of rationalization. And other part of the group said, "Oh no, that's too heavy," and they were overflooded by fear or by sadness. "Oh, my grandmother is dying, and I don't want to." So I saw these two reactions, and then I thought, how would it be if we could make some more inner safety, some more inner process of safety? And that's how I began to work with the inner, the safe place inside bodily. There are a lot of techniques that use imaginary safe places, which also works, but in my focusing tradition, I wanted to have it in the body. And I was surprised that all of my clients they could say, okay, that's how it feels. It's here, or here, and it gives me safety. It gives me comfort. It's not a hiding place. It's
Mhm.
a growth place. It could be a hiding place, like when I feel unsafe, I try to rationalize, and then I feel safe. But that's definitely a hiding place, not a safe place. And that's how I developed it, Greg. To I worked further with it, and in many contexts, in especially in Warsaw. I go to Warsaw every year for 2 weeks, and I have there 2 weeks of focusing oriented therapy training. And they are very nice colleagues, very nice people, very experienced also. And there, with them, I developed it further. Um,
So,
now it's in all our trainings in Leuven.
okay. Um, I'd like to hear more about it. So let me just ask a few questions. The first step, it sounds like the first step you learned was necessary was to find a safe space in the body.
Indeed, yeah.
And how do you do that? You simply let your attention go down into your body and try to find a place that you know somehow internally is your safe place.
Yeah, yeah, mainly it is that, and it can help if before you clear the space.
Okay.
The first step of focusing, we all know, like Jenlin said, it's easier to dance when the room is cleaned up. Right? Yeah. So we make a space for the dance, and then the space is getting bigger, and and then yeah, the organism feels a bit lighter, and the
Mhm.
heavy stuff is put aside for a while. The inner critic has put aside for a while, and then it's easier to contact this safe place in the body. We sometimes call it also the good place, or a comfort place, or a place where I feel at home,
Mhm.
or a place where it's just good to be in my body, because this concept of safe place doesn't seem to fit for every participant.
Yeah.
But these similar terms are also, yeah, pointing to the same phenomenon, to give yourself that kind of, yeah, safety, that the organism feels free enough to open up a bit more. Yeah.
As you talk about it, I can feel a little more expansiveness in myself. So if I was
Mhm.
going to go through this process with you, what would I do next?
Yeah. Next is that we identify your existential demon, but that could take several sessions. If we have it in individual therapy, in a group we have one session, and there are evoking questions for that, like uh, which part of you is my tormentor? Which part of you would you like to cut out and throw it away as far as you can. Which part as you um, wakes you up in the middle of the night and keeps you awake. The essence of the conceptualization is that we call an existential demon a part of us, so we can have a dialogue with it. So,
But existential demon in the sense not necessarily in the sense that the content is some kind of existential given or something, but the sense that its role in life is feels restrictive or destructive or something like that. Is that right?
yeah, it could be like you say it, but it can also be connected to the existential givens.
Okay.
So, like feeling anxiety of being left behind and being the only person in the world, or the awareness that what I do, how I live my life, doesn't make any sense at all, which can be very disrupting and dysregulating. So we try to connect them a bit with existential givens
Mhm.
in the idea that maybe that are our deepest fears because they, let's say, they are about the whole of our existence,
Yeah.
the fundament of our existence, and also, let's say, the sky of our existence or the
Yeah.
horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That these are the kinds of issues that in some way affect everything.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
So then what do you do once you identify or a person is able to identify their existential demon? What would be
Yeah.
the way
Okay.
of working with it?
Yeah. So we well, let's say we always start with contacting the body. That's what we always do, so that it's not just imaginary journey or so. It's really bodily felt, and we ask the client to connect this safe place. Mostly we have a drawing with it, so can they can have their drawing next to them,
Okay.
and then the therapist is a kind of facilitator of this dialogue. He invites the demon that we have been identifying before to visualize him in the space, in the same space where we can see him. eh? So, it's a bit like chair work in EFT, but it's mobile because the this entity that comes there, sometimes it's a dragon, or sometimes it's a mist, or it's a dark figure, or it's a big dog, or it's gradually it changes. It mostly come closer during this conversation, and it changes. The look and feel changes.
Hmm.
And yes, surprisingly, sometimes it ends with hugging the little boy or the little dog that has. I
Hmm.
know it sounds a bit like a Hollywood scenario, but people people who know about this process like you, I'm sure you are not surprised by the this transformation.
No, I'm not.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
sounds very, very powerful when something that has been a tormentor, maybe for years, suddenly becomes something that you actually want to comfort.
Yes, indeed. Yes, and it's really touching also as facilitator. It's
Mm-hmm.
whoa, yeah, that you could then you can feel this is really about this existential layer. This is
Hmm.
not just, let's say, a neurotic symptom or so.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's about the whole being of this person who is in charge here. So, yeah, that's why I like to do that because it's so deeply connected with our existence. So,
It sounds.
together with Sophie Verdegem, I wrote an article about uh, group supervision in a focusing way. I know you wrote also about that, but I developed kind of also in Warsaw with my colleagues, I developed kind of little procedure to make this group supervision. It's small groups of 8 people. We work a lot with that format in our trainings
Hmm.
to make it as experiential as possible. So, and we give the supervision three assistants. The first is the client who is there at his own supervision. So one member of the group is the representative of the client. We have an alter ego of the therapist that resonates with the supervision as if he was in that chair. That's another source of experiential information or material. And the third assistant is a timekeeper who every 15 minutes stops the supervision and says, "Stop now, whatever what is happening. Please go inside to the center of your body. Ask yourself, what is going on now? What is there at this very moment?" So that's the third source of experiential material. And then we bring that together in like, yeah, then the process carries itself forward. So, and
What's
I really like to do that.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. So
Yeah.
what does it tease out that more ordinary supervision might not quite get to?
What does it?
What does it sort of identify or highlight that other forms of supervision might not get to?
Yeah, it definitely brings in more felt senses about the client
Hmm.
and not just analytical uh, situation of the problem of the client. And it brings more relational stuff. So, because the representative can say that, for instance, I feel disrespected when you talk about me like that. Huh?
Hmm.
So there is some relational stuff, and yeah, what it brings in is the client itself. Of course, it's not the client itself, but himself, but it's a representative, and it's surprising to see that how supervisors say that what their representative of their client expresses is so accurate and is so, yeah, as if there is
Hmm.
some kind of, I don't know, crossing, I don't know, but it's, yeah, there is more experiential material. That is
Yeah.
definitely my
Yeah.
ambition, and I see that it works. I do it online with every month with two groups, also with Polish colleagues, small groups of 8, and yeah, I
That
really like to do that.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful thing to share more broadly with the FOT world. I'm sure people would be
Yes,
really
yes,
interested in it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I had planned to come to the FOT conference the last days, but I was on holiday with some friends, and but I will definitely take the next opportunity to present it a bit wider internationally because it's only in Flanders and in the Netherlands. We speak the same language,
Uh-huh.
so I do it there too.
When you're teaching FOT to therapists or focusing to therapists, do you bring in some of uh, Gendlin's philosophy that you think is applicable to psychotherapy,
Mhm,
or do you keep it quite experiential?
mhm. Well, that's a good question. I'm also involved in the International Focusing Institute, in the International Leadership Council. Big words. It's a nice group, by the way, very nice. And we sometimes, and I especially sometimes worry about the watering down of how focusing is offered to a broad public. So for me, you cannot see focusing separate from the philosophy of the implicit.
Okay.
So that's a crazy idea. So and I see that sometimes happening. So they have meditation, you have hypnosis, then you have focusing, and it breaks my heart because all this complexity is cut off. So our students in the FOT training, they get a lot of theory of the philosophy of the implicit, the process model, which is extremely complex for not philosophers. I'm not a philosopher, so mostly we read around the process model, the texts that are about the process model. Um, so yes, Greg, for me it's very important that we teach our FOT students the tradition and the philosophy and the complexity of
Mhm.
focusing. It's not just a method. So,
Yeah.
mhm,
So, what aspects of the philosophy do you feel it's important for therapists that want to work in this way that they have some understanding of? Are there particular things that you think you really need to get that in order to work in this way?
mhm. Well, the relation first comes first, I guess. So when I'm in my therapy room with my client, there are two implicits that meet in
Hmm.
the same implicit space. It's not just two mouths that are talking to each other.
Hmm.
Two bodies meet in this interaction, which is an, an implicit space. And yeah, what I also like is a sense of wonder. So there is always more. I have two grandchildren, and they really live that sense of wonder. And it's very, yeah, I learn a lot from them to not think that you already know and yeah, we've seen that and know what will come next. No, just be open, be curious. For me, that's focusing is a bit for me the art of letting surprise yourself
Yeah.
by what is not there yet, or the implicit that wants to come. The not knowing also, which is not really not knowing. It's not that we don't know anything, but the attitude of bracketing what you know and be open for what comes and what wants to come more. And then this process model, which is also complex for me to really get it. It's not like the therapist gives empathy to the client and the client reacts to that. It's one whole process, and I find it very nice to think in this process terms, although
Hmm.
I find it complex sometimes.
Yeah.
And then maybe the last dimension is this all that is out there. So connection with the universe or with the cosmic energy or all of life or and also the support from all that is out there. So these are some I think for me and the last one is the life forward direction. Not to forget about that. So the very hopeful idea that in this implying there is more, but not just more, but more in the life forward direction. For me, that's a bit that these are the keywords for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way that you've expressed that. I really get a sense of what you're offering as having a unique character to it. And
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
it now it starts to feel very different from maybe a more traditional person-centered approach or an
mm-hmm,
EFT approach. You're bringing a different depth of implication of what's
mm-hmm,
happening in the therapy room. And I'm wondering, I remember many years ago talking with Gene about this, that his philosophy seemed very interactional, the principle of interaction first, very intersubjective, very relational.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when he practiced, it seemed sometimes that he would fall back into what looked like quite a traditional person centered form of being with the client. And I'm just wondering, in the way that you teach and practice, how do you, if you do, how do you express kind of what's happening in the relationship? Is it something that guides you or something that you share with the client? Do you actively talk about the relationship or only if it
Yes,
needs to be addressed? Okay.
of course, yes, in a tentative way.
Yeah.
And sometimes I ask the client to, can I have a minute for myself to feel what this is about?
Mhm.
And it's a bit surprising for the client, but also a model. And then, yes, I definitely want to express what happens between us. We also have that in our tradition to work interactionally, um, with this interactional phenomena that are so important. So it's not happening in a vacuum.
Mhm.
It's happening between us.
Yeah.
I
And
definitely do. We definitely do that. Yeah.
and the that level of self-disclosure by the therapist, how does that go over when you're teaching people? Do people readily accept that? I only ask because sometimes I've had
Mm.
students shy away from it or be worried that they're
Mm.
taking the focus onto themselves. How do people
Yeah,
respond to that?
in some students, especially in the beginning, they
Mhm.
think client-centered therapy is like just listening and not showing yourself. But of course, that's not true. We have to be present as much as we can.
Mhm.
So it happens that some students are a bit afraid of it, but that's not the main problem. So there's not, in my experience, it's not a real problem about it. Some psychoanalysts call us emotional incontinent. Yeah, that's not my invention. So that's something you don't do. It's not appropriate. So,
Yeah,
but I don't care about that. So I think
yeah,
it's very worthwhile to be authentic, an authentic personality. Like in the more existential dimension, we are just two people looking for to have a good life and to see how we can have a better life. So we're not just the expert and the one who doesn't know anything.
yeah,
We're just fellow companions.
yeah. In
Mm.
terms of psychoanalysis, I know that traditional form of psychoanalysis and it still exists. It very
Mhm.
different from the kind of psychoanalysis that someone like Lynn Preston is developing and
Yes,
teaching.
indeed. Hmm.
Uh, um,